Well, Shabbat Shalom to all of our family and friends. It's another Sabbath morning, and we're glad that Abba has allowed us to be alive today. He has caused us to arise from our sleep and given us the beauty of a new Sabbath, and so that's always something that we'll be grateful for and we'll always look to. I look to Sabbath. There's so much when, sometimes probably even when I'm at work, I'm focusing on work, right? I'm getting my job done, but I'm looking to Sabbath, right? I'm always looking to Sabbath because I look forward to not just the rest, but yes, the rest from all of the things that we labor in during the week or whatever. But I also look forward to the experience where he released this energy and this life flow into my life, and it restores. I'm looking forward to restoration.
I call it the R&B. Like we know rhythm and blues, but it's not rhythm and blues. It's rest and blessing. And the King's Sabbath is his R&B day.
Rest and blessing.
For rest and blessing. And so, yeah, I look forward to it as well. It's not that you trying to opt out or Calgon take me away, lift me up, beam me up, Scotty. That's not the issue. It is the sense of we're about to be restored. So we can do this because we're going to be restored.
Yes.
It's coming. It's coming. The strength of the restoration, the R&B is coming into our lives. So we can face whatever we got to face this week and do it to excellence and do it well. Do it without resentment or without resistance,
right?
Without frustration, without anger, because R&B is coming.
R&B is coming. I love that. R&B is coming. So that's something you can put in your notes. R&B is coming. Rest and blessing. So as we get back into this lesson or this prophetic word that the Lord released to us back in October of 2018, we realized that we've been talking about circumcision for a while, and we don't want you to get discouraged in this process. We're taking our time and allowing Abba to really walk us through this. We really feel like there is a message here for not just, and we're going to see this today, for not just our generation or not just for those who have been on the scene for a while. If you think about it, this message is for our children, right? For our children's children. I have grandchildren now. And so this message is for them. This is preparing them for what's to come and to make sure they are able and that they are walking in faith and loving on Abba as these processes roll out. We're starting to hear more and more from the political realm and all these different things of I call them the doomsday prophets. Because the more you listen to them, the more you feel like you're doomed, right? What in the world are we going to do if all these things that they're predicting is going to happen? How are we going to survive this stuff? And so I feel like the message that we're talking about, this prophetic word, it actually empowers, it gives energy and life to people and families. It gives hope to people and families that will face these times with us. So that's one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this lesson. We dealt with the circumcision and the operations and the areas of operations and how he goes about operating on us. We talked about the scapels, the revelation streams. And so we should have a pretty good idea now what circumcision is.
About the cutting away of the excess flesh.
Yes.
And all that is susceptible, sensitive, sentimental, sensual, all these things that are excess flesh areas are the areas, the areas of operation. The methodology obviously is the revelation streams that he releases from heaven. So we've got the history, we got the background of that. Now we can got to go into why he's doing it now and what is happening. First of all, understand it's a cross-generational thing. This is not one big circumcision. It's always a process, and every generation deals with this at a certain time, at an appropriate time. Every generation. So when we're talking about our children, we talk about our grandchildren, and yet we still talk about the Joshuas and the Calebs and the Moseses and the Aarons of the different generations that passed. All generations should know and share this kind of circumcision, cutting away the excess flesh, surrender to the revelation streams and the lasers of God. And that process we see, and it passes through all generations, but it encompasses all of them too.
Right. And so one of the key words, or one of the concepts that came out of this, and you just said it, was surrendering. And I remember when we first started talking about this, that was the way you introduced this, is when we talked about surrender, we're surrendering, right? And we're yielding to him, and we're giving him our reproductive capacities to remove that excess flesh. And here's what you said: for a greater cause, right? So that way we don't get caught up in the here and now. It's important to be present here and now, but we don't get caught there, and we don't get lost in the here and now, and we're constantly surrendering. So having said that, so this prophetic word, I want to read it because a part of where we're going today has a lot to do with what's said in this prophetic word. So he says, the church has entered a time of mass circumcision, like unto that which took place during the time of Moshe, after the mass deliverance of the Hebrew people from Egypt. So what we were talking about right before we started this post was the what seems like the missing content of this prophecy, or what wasn't said in this prophecy, and that was that this prophecy would actually identify two overlapping times, two leaders, so to speak. One is Moshe, who is leaving the scene, and then there is Joshua, who is coming on the scene, and they both represents two different times. Now we see some similar things happening in both of their leadership.
And the same spirit leading them.
And the same spirit leading them is God, right? And so, but what we see in Joshua's time, or the beginning of Joshua, which also identifies these two generations who are circumcised. So I'm going to read something here, and I want you to expound on it as a segue into the environment. That's what we're going to be talking about today, the environment, because we mentioned here that this circumcision the effect will yield a similar environment to that which surrounded the time of Israel's circumcision. So we understand that the environment is also a very key part of this. But I want to read this. This is Joshua chapter 5, I'm sorry. And I'll start with maybe, I'll just start at verse 1, if that's okay. It says, when all the kings of Amorite, or on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaan, or Canaanites, I guess, near the sea, heard how Adonai had dried up the Jordan River ahead of the people of Israel until they had crossed it, their hearts failed them, and they fell into depression. This translation says, because of the people of Israel. And it says so think about environment as we're talking about this. It was at that time that Adonai said to Joshua, make yourselves knives of flint and circumcise the people of Israel again the second time. So we know this circumcision had taken place a time before now. And so Joshua made himself knives of flint and circumcised the people of Israel to give a ha'aralot, the heel of foreskins. The reason Joshua, listen to verse 4, the reason Joshua circumcised was that all the people who had left Egypt, who were males, all the fighting men, had died in the desert along the way after leaving Egypt. For although all the people who left Egypt had been circumcised, all those who had been born in the desert on the way as they went from Egypt had not been circumcised. Those born in the desert on the way as they left from Egypt had not been circumcised, because the people of Israel walked 40 years in the desert until the whole nation, that is, the fighting men who had left Egypt, had died out, because they had not heeded what Adonai said. Adonai had sworn that he would not allow them to see the land which Adonai swore to their ancestors that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their children to take their place. And it was these whom Joshua circumcised. Till then, they had been uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised while traveling. So I want you to speak a little bit. What I always look at is the context, right? So before this circumcision take place, they've crossed the Jordan, right? Which was an awesome miracle, just like crossing the Red Sea. So this was a beautiful miracle. God gets involved. So they crossed the Jordan, and they're being circumcised. But what's to come? Because they got to face Jericho, right? Which is a whole nother. So they're coming out. They just had this wonderful miracle and environment. And I'm not going to get in there because I want you to talk about that. But the environment has a lot to do with why this circumcision takes place at this time.
Wow. I mean, there's so much here. And we only got a few minutes today, but we're going to try to unpack this a little bit and relate it to now, even though the story is ancient. It's a repeating story that keeps happening. And so we have, as Brother Tony mentioned to us, we've got these two overlapping generations. We have two warring, competing mindsets. We have two nations. We have things that's shifting all around us. They are totally irreconcilable, it appears. Mm-hmm. We have the Canaanites, and we have the Israelites. Yes. And the Israelites have a calling and a commissioning and a purpose in life that are just totally at odds with the whole Canaanite mindset and purpose and way of life. And isn't that where we are today? And so what we have is that we have these two poles, two polar extremes arising in society. Every generation or so, we have a polarization process take place where people choose sides and are on one side or the other. There's the fleshly. Basically, it ties down to some Greek philosophies that took place. There's always philosophy. One of them was Stoicism, and the other was Epicureanism. One of them was, eat, meat, drink, and be merry. Do whatever feels good. Love the one you're with. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that that philosophy, just grab all the gusto you can, get what you want, make your bucket list and go after it. Yeah. This kind of approach, fleshly orientation to life, and this is what life's about. But on the other side, there's a side that says, no, this is the way we do things around here. Decently and in order. We have structure. We have methodology. This is the way it's run over here. This is just the way the world works. That's just the way it is, and you need to learn how to get fit within that system. And at a certain stage, these two poles, these two polar extremes always begin to clash, and the Holy One, the Spirit of God in people begins to arise, and there's a 1 or 2 or 20 or 1,000 or 100,000 that arises and says, I don't choose either. I do not choose the sex, drugs, and rock and roll idea that just do whatever feels good to you at the moment, and life's just a temporal thing. Just enjoy the fleshly aspects of it. Nor do I take the other side that says, no, it's rules and regulations and laws and structure, and you just do what goes before you, is laid before you by the powers that be. That's just the way it is. I don't take either of those. As a matter of fact, a whole new era is about to operate, and it is impossible for it to happen absent a powerful change in people and a change in the environment. And so this is where we begin this whole process of the circumcision. Is we are faced in this world, in this hour in which we live, with the polarizations of the peoples. And now the question is, are we going to fit into one side or the other? Or is God calling forth a people at such a time as this to begin to say, neither of the two polar extremes is satisfactory. Neither is fulfilling the purpose of God. We are not rebelling, but we are establishing a counterculture because we are driven by love. We are driven by a motivation of calm and kindness and wisdom. We're driven by the Spirit of the living God to do what His Word says. It's a return to His ways, to His thoughts, to His mind, to His compassions. You know, I awakened this morning with a song in my heart, and you know, it basically the little part of it goes like this. Will you take this man? Will you live for him? Will you go where he goes? Will you do what he does? Will you love like he loves? And it goes on from there. But the key factor is here, it's not acceptable to fall into this pattern, that pattern, this polar mindset, that polar mindset. To the contrary, this is about fulfilling the plan of God. And that's when the circumcision comes in. The environment of the people of God must be a certain thing. The environment in the world must be a certain thing. And boy, do we have both happening right now. That is the environment. I've said it, environment is, first of all, human context. The human context, what is happening in people's hearts. If you're satisfied to be either on the right or the left, the liberal or the conservative, the religious or the secular, if you're satisfied to be in that, then you haven't reached the human context of the environment of circumcision yet. I don't think you're there. I think you're ready.
Yes.
I think if you're listening to this podcast right now, you're listening to our conversations these weeks, you are ready, and the human environment, the human condition in your process, the context of your humanity is calling. Something's inside of you. You don't know what it is, but there's something drawing you. This is not enough what I'm seeing the religious world give me, or the secular world give me, the politics give me, or the technology give me. It's not enough. We must see the hand of God move. We must see the will of God done. We must see the beauty of the Son of God burst forth. And that's really, I think, the human context of the environment. The second thing is the external set of surroundings. It must be impossible to continue the way it is.
Oh, wow.
Look, you mentioned it earlier, doomsday stuff.
Right.
From one person saying 12 years and this place is going to go away. Something about the environmental mess.
Sure.
And somebody else saying, oh, you know, the government's going to conspire against us and kill all of us. Mm-hmm. And another one saying that oh, you know, what's going to happen is China or Russia are taking over our country, or you know, maybe it's the folks from Mexico, or the folks from the Muslims. It's somebody's always coming after us, and if we continues like it is, it's just we're gonna fall. We're gonna collapse. Doomsday is going to come. I mean, the asteroids are going to hit. And I'm not saying none of that's going to happen. I'm saying that's when we start to move.
Yes.
That's our cue. That's our environmental cue, when you can really give some credibility to some of these, what seem like wild stories of the doomsday issue. The sky really is falling. So what do we do? What's our job? What's our task? And so that sense of the external set of surroundings, the conditions in which a person lives and operates, that's our environment. And the environment that is conducive to this mass circumcision we're talking about, the calling forth of the cutting away of flesh, are conditions in which we simply must see the hand of God move.
That's when Papa B was talking, it drew my attention to verse 13 is where it starts in chapter 5 of Joshua. And he says, one day when Joshua was there by Jericho, he raised his eyes and looked, and in front of him stood a man with his drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went over to him and asked him, are you on our side? And so here's probably people talking about, which side are you on? He says, are you on our side or on the side of our enemies? And listen to the answer. He says, no, he replied, but I am the commander of Adonai's army. I have come just now. Joshua fell down with his face to the ground and worshiped him, then asked, what does my Lord have to say to his servant? That's the question we need to be asking in this hour. What does my Lord have to say to his servant? And the commander of Adonai's army answered Joshua, take your sandals off your feet. This is not about whose side, what's going on, doomsday prophecy or not. This is about a much more important issue, right? This is about Abba, the Father's kingdom being released into this realm, into this time, and impacting all of those who are going. So when I remember when we were talking about the deliverance that took place, point that you brought out that I'm holding on to is this deliverance was not just for Israel. Right? So Egypt was there too. The Egyptians were there too. And they also saw this powerful God, this beautiful God, this love affair. They saw that. They saw him come to rescue his people or to begin this process of drawing them out. And they also had the opportunity to be drawn out. So when we think of this environment that's been created, when I think about this, it's perfect. They've just experienced this beautiful miracle of the Lord bringing them through the water, which they ancestors saw. Now they're seeing it. Beautiful, beautiful picture. But is that the end of the story?
No, of course it's not the end of the story. The thing about the movement, you mentioned that they had Jericho to face. They had the Canaanites to face, the Amorites to face. They had all these different resistors, the different adversaries, the many challenges. Actually, both sides of the river, of the Jordan River, both sides of the political spectrum and the theological, and all peoples were a resistance to the thing that God was doing, unknowing that what God was doing was restoring and redeeming.
Yes.
And the whole plan is about implementing the whole idea of the circumcision is about preparing our hearts to be part of his implementation program for his great redemptive and restorative plan. Now, you mentioned that they had crossed over the nations of the world. The nations of Canaan in particular had heard about the crossing of the Jordan by this group. The waters of the Jordan parted for them, and there was no holding them back. And they came, the people of the covenant, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who had been there generations ago, came through the waters, and they were there. They're alive. They live. They exist. And without understanding what that means to them, immediately the resistance came up. Now, if you understand the way the Holy One works, we in our generation, the generation just past, have seen this happen again.
Yes.
Israel as a people, an imperfect people, Israel as a people has been brought back majestically and magnificently, miraculously to the land of Israel.
Yes.
And it's, the descriptions of what the Canaanites said. They were depressed. They were anxious. They were distraught.
Right.
Hey, the world is all over the world. They're distraught that this is taking place. And of course, we focus largely upon the Muslim, the Islamic side, because they're very vocal. But it's also the secularists. It's also the Stoics of our world who say this system is going to be messed up, and they're right. The kingdom, what's happening in Israel today, you don't look at it on a microscopic level or a microcosm or micromanagement level. Well, they're doing wrong here. They're doing right there. They're doing this. Don't try to micromanage this process. This, as it was in the time of Joshua, is designed to become the center point, the headquarters of the operation of the kingdom of God, and the representation and the offering of Messiah to the world, as it was in the days of Joshua, and as it was as the kingdom developed over a course of time. This nation was the one who obviously is the place, the physical location where Yeshua was manifested, was offered to the world, for the world, unto the world. and is from which everything has been birthed. Now, as we see the restoration of Israel in our day, in the generation just past, so it is again. It's not a matter of they're establishing a nation over there. It's not just a homeland for the wandering Jew. It is the base of operations of the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. And this implementation plan is, this is what I want to be a part of.
Right.
I could be a part of something else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I could be building my own dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I could be trying to amass a fortune. I could be trying to do a bunch of good deeds.
Yes.
I could be trying to establish institutions and organizations and 501c3s and ministries and all this stuff. Or I could do what God's doing.
Yes.
I could join him in his plan and implement his strategy. So yeah, what's going ahead, what's ahead of us, what we're looking forward to, and how we attach ourselves to that will determine whether we want to surrender voluntarily. Do we think it's worth it? Do we think it's something worthwhile that's taking place?
Right.
Yes. The only thing perhaps that's worthwhile in our day is to see this movement begin to be furthered and strengthened, and to have the flesh put away, the mindsets, the pseudo-intelligence of man on the other side put away, and say, what would our master want us to do to build his kingdom in his way, in his time?
Right. Ecclesiastical circumcision, mass ecclesiastical circumcision. What that did was that focused our attention on a specific group when he said a mass ecclesiastical circumcision, the ecclesia. Here's what I'm seeing. So this group that's about to be circumcised here in this passage, they were born in the desert, right? Israel was traveling from this experience of being in bondage to Egypt 400 plus years. And now these children are born in this process, right? And there's been no circumcision yet because they were traveling and things of that nature. But there's about to be one because of what's coming and how important it is to have this identifying mark, this covenant mark on their lives. Here we are now. We have a generation that was born. I look at my own children that was born during the time we were transitioning in this ecclesia, in this ecclesiastical world. And they were born in the desert of all of that, right? And so there was a lot of things that they were exposed to and not exposed to, right? And so here this generation that was born in the desert that had not been circumcised, they have grown of age. They're coming to the point now to where it's the handoff is about to take place. The responsibility is upon us, right, to make sure that we are properly introducing these children to the Father in the way he has given us to do so. He has joined us in this introduction, and he says it's time to introduce these children to me the way I have instructed you to, right? Because this group will not, right? They didn't heed, they didn't respond the way so this group will not. But this group is responsible for the next phase of this journey. And there are some oppositions and some challenges coming, but I want them to know that I'm going to be with them. I'm going to be with Joshua, just like I was with Moses. I'm going to be with you guys. And he proves it, right? He shows up and proves that he's with them. I love the fact, because you mentioned resistors, I love the fact that the resistors are there. The resistance is taking place. Abba gets involved, right? When he acts, the resistance fails.
But it fails a little bit at a time. The resistance is actually beneficial for the development, as long as we don't cave into the resistance, and as long as we don't hate the resistance, as long as we don't overreact to the resistance. The resistance is actually can become the biggest friend we have, because at first it keeps us focused. We won't have opportunity, we won't have time, We don't have the luxury of saying, well, I just don't have to worry about my resistance today. They're coming after you.
That's correct.
They don't like you, and that's okay. As a matter of fact, knowing that gives you some focus and gives you some ability not to be angry at them and retributive toward them, but to instead say, okay, this keeps me on my toes.
Right.
And now I got to keep doing what I'm doing and not overreact to it, not knee-jerk to it, not get all ranty or outragey, and not all depressed and sulky. And I know that I'm using some silly adjectives here, but I think you see so much of that as being the response. How dare they do this to us? And the Holy One says, unless you have this resistance, you can't grow and become what you're going to do. The resistance is part of my process. And that's why he told the people, he said, I am not going to drive them all out in front of you at one time. Little bit by little bit, little area by little area, situation by situation, I will drive them out, because you need the resistance to keep you focused and not to lose your calmness, your kindness, your goodness, and yet to keep moving forward in the process.
And it builds strength, right? In the natural sense, we work out, right? How do we work out, right? We have to have resistance. And so and at time that resistance builds, but we're getting stronger till we're developing. And I believe our faith is developing. Our relationship, our levels of intimacy are developing. So this environment, and we'll close on this. So this environment that these young people are going to find themselves in. Now after this, so this experience happens with Joshua. Take your sandals off. And I think in this context, Joshua represents all of us who are leading our families, right? And we, our families, need to know that we have the love for Abba, and we have the response of taking off our sandals and yielding to a greater purpose. Right now, Joshua, the most important thing you can do is take your sandals off your feet, because the place where you are standing is holy.
Yeah, strategy, planning, step-by-step operations are not the way this works. This works in experiential surrender to the Creator, to His beauty, to His majesty, and who He is. And knowing that you don't have to know everything if you know Him. And so that's really the key factor. If you understand the way in which we talk about, in English, we read children of Israel. And we sometimes picture kids or maybe teenagers or college and careers. We would define those in the church in those days. You know, this process. This was anyone who was 40 years of age or less. Actually, he was 50 years or less, because you start before bar mitzvah age whenever they left. So we're now talking about people. And then we've got the Caleb and the Joshua side of this process. And to some degree, we have the Itamar, which is the sons of Aaron. We have Itamar and Eleazar, who are probably in the elder part of that group, not as old as Moshe, or not probably as old as Joshua. But in that process, we have a series of ages that are designed here. And so the ones who have been through some stuff and had this experience with the Creator. I mean, I'd love to be able to have Caleb tell me his stories about his encounters with God. We see a lot of what Joshua had written from the time of the war with Amalek, when he really came to our attention, to the time when he went up with Moshe to the top of the mountain. Then we see all the other things that developed, and how he was trained as a leader, and all this experience. And here, even before this circumcision takes place, we sense, or right as the circumcision is taking place, we hear another encounter with the angel of the Holy One. And it's because of these kind of experiential encounters with God. That's what changes you. And that's what empowers you to be able to bring another generation along and train that generation. It's not going to be a bunch of knowledge and learning that you do. It's not going to have a bunch of ideas and concepts and programs that you've developed. It's going to be that freshness of the intimate relationship you have with God and His angels and His Son. And in that process, this freshness of love. Everything must be birthed out of this passion,
Mm-hmm.
energy, and love that comes only by being in his presence with him. And when that happens, you want things cut off of your flesh. Matter of fact, the faster you can get them off of your flesh,
right.
the more excited you are. You want to be able to move with him, flow with him, do what he says. You don't want those hindrances of sensitivity and sensibility and sentimentality and susceptibility and sensuality. You don't want that stuff to pull you back. You know, Paul's the perfect example of that. I count all things as rubbish.
She said, yeah.
As rubbish. They're not really rubbish. They're things of importance to the world. But to me, in comparison to knowing him, to following him, to being with him, for the excellency of that opportunity, that is what I live for. That's what I'm here for. And that's the calling. And if we're going to see this mass circumcision take place, it would require some of us in previous generations joining with some of those in moving down the generational chains, awakening and saying, for the beauty of who he is, for the majesty of what he does, we will follow him.
Abba, awaken in our children, awaken in our families, our grandchildren, our sons and our daughters. Awaken in them the reality of who you are, your love, your desire for them. Awaken in them the time and the season. And we thank you, Papa, that you are working in all of our lives, that you are with us. You are with us during the times of the resistance. You are with us to strengthen us and to move us forward in releasing the kingdom environment. We thank you that you have given us the wisdom to begin establishing this counterculture, and we will see it and we will be a part of it. We thank you, Abba. We're just so in love with you. So thank you for this Sabbath morning. And I pray that your blessings, your holiness, and your rest would be upon all of us as we experience this Sabbath together. We're out of time. Listen, thank you for watching Torah Talks with Tony and Bill. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom.